Got a minute or two? We have a way to make it not okay. Welcome to Sinister Minutes. I'm your host, writer and storyteller, Kurt Homer. Next to me is the master of macabre musical musings, the maestro of mood, Tim Parker. Together, let us take you on a journey into the dark heart of disturbing. Sinister Minutes. It's not okay. Sinister Minutes features tales that include disturbing content. That's intentional, because like the podcast itself, the creators here at Sinister Minutes are really not okay. Content featured on this podcast may include descriptions of abuse, addiction, alcohol, blood, bodily fluids, bondage, bones, bullying, burning, cancer, cannibalism, cheating, clowns, coma, confinement, control, cults, death, decapitation, depression, diets, divorce, domestic abuse, drowning, drugs, dying, eating disorders, epidemics, experimentation, family conflict, fear, fighting, fire, gaslighting, ghosts, gore, guns, harassment, hate crimes, hazing, homelessness, homicide, hospitalization, hostage situations, hostile work environments, illness, incarceration, infidelity, injury, institutionalization, kidnapping, manipulation, medical procedures, memory problems, mental health issues, military service, misogyny, murder, mutilation, needles, nightmares, nudity, pain, panic attacks, paralysis, physical abuse, pornography, physical assault, police brutality, poverty, profanity, religion, robbery, scars, screaming, self-harm, smoking, snakes, spiders, stabbing, stalking, starvation, substance abuse, suicide, terrorism, threats, torture, victim blaming, violence, war, weapons, weather, and maybe, just maybe, witches. Welcome to another episode of the Sinister Minutes podcast. We're well past the point of Happy New Year and well into the horrifying drudgery that describes January here in the Northeast U.S. Long, dark nights, cold temps, blowing snow, and an overwhelming sense of empathy for the father in The Shining. Here's Johnny. Well, one way to beat the winter blues is to drink heavily. We know how well that turned out in The Shining. Oh, and The Thing. Well, maybe we'll try some other life enhancements instead. With that in mind, Tim and I are bringing in a life coach to get us through the basics. Finding the opportunities that are right there in front of us every day. Realizing that there are no obstacles, only stepping stones to bring us closer to our goals. The hell with it. We're just going to drink heavily. Today's episode presents a story about a guy who's faced with some similar decisions, a piece we call Life Coach. Our hero has had a bad day. I mean a really bad day, and everybody he meets has advice for him about turning his luck around. Now, if this was one of those feel-good, motivational podcasts, everything would work out beautifully in the end. But hey, this is Sinister Minutes. Are you enjoying what we do here? By all means, we'd love to hear from you. Find us via Facebook or Blue Sky or YouTube under Sinister Minutes. Shoot, send us an email via sinisterminutes@gmail.com. And my goodness, if you don't want to leave us out in the cold, frozen stiff, won't you please subscribe? Sinister Minutes is available wherever you grab your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, seriously, wherever. A nice rating or a review might be enough to keep us from slipping deeper into Red Rum mode. Oh hey, Tim's been working on some new music, and that always benefits everybody. Today's piece has an industrial feel to it, a little something called Shake My Bones. At the end of the story, we invite you to jam out to the music that we're sure is going to leave you feeling delightfully not okay. Life Coach, written and narrated by Kurt Homan. Kyle stared at the underside of his truck perched on the mechanic's lift. Aside from a few parts like tires and a general color scheme of rust, he had little idea of what he was looking at. How bad is it? Marcus, the mechanic, wiped his hands with a rag that had long ago given up on absorbing more grease. Salt and pepper hair jutted out from under an equally greasy baseball cap. Thought your differential was the culprit at first, but that checked out. You're looking at a new tranny. Old as this truck is, might be time to cut your losses and get a new one. Damn, Kyle shook his head. I can't afford anything right now, and without wheels I'm toast. Can't I just drive it till it's dead? Yeah, did that getting it here. Giving up on the rag, Marcus wiped his fingers on his coveralls. If you want to scrap it, I know a guy. Probably good for 100, 150. That's all? I dropped 50 in the gas tank just yesterday. Marcus shrugged. Up to you. You're looking at 3,500 to start if you want me to fix it. Kyle shook his head. Call your scrapper. That's what I'd do, said Marcus. It sucks, but you know what they say. Challenges are just opportunities in disguise. Normally, a quick 5-minute drive got him back to his apartment, so Kyle decided to save on taxi fare and walk. The road hadn't been designed with pedestrians in mind, and he jumped over to the tall grass several times when careless drivers veered onto the shoulder. Although the rain had stopped hours earlier, the ground remained wet, and in no time his shoes were soaked through. His feet numb with cold, and every step forward accompanied by a wet squish. Kyle's already bad day was turning even worse. Challenges are just opportunities in disguise, he muttered as he walked. Bad enough his truck had broken down. Worse, it wasn't worth fixing. But piling on, now his mechanic was spouting feel-good bullshit. Back home at last, Kyle turned the oven on as low as it would go, took off his soggy shoes, and set them on the rack to dry. After stripping off his socks and rubbing his frozen feet vigorously with a towel in the bathroom, he wrapped a blanket around them, plunked down on the throne, and picked up his phone. He stared at it a while before making the call he'd been dreading. "What the hell, Kyle?" Jason, his boss, sounded gruff when he was in the best of moods, and this was far from best. "You were supposed to be here hours ago." "I'm sorry," replied Kyle through gritted teeth. "My truck broke down and you're just calling now? Who'd you get to work your shift? Because they sure as hell didn't show up." Wasn't able to reach anybody. He tensed in anticipation. Unfucking believable. You know it's your responsibility to get coverage when you're out. That was most definitely a manager's job, but Kyle kept the thought to himself. You know who worked the front desk this morning? Continued Jason. I did. The hotel wouldn't ever win any hospitality awards with Jason greeting the guests. I'm gonna have to be out the rest of the week, said Kyle. I wish I could get there, but there's no way. Great. So today, in addition to doing your job and mine, I also get to rework the whole schedule. Know what, Kyle? Why don't you take next week off too? Maybe that extra time will help turn your I wish into I will. The phone disconnected before Kyle had a chance to respond. In addition to needing a new truck, he was about to lose 2 weeks' worth of wages. How was he supposed to turn I wish into I will with no income? And what the hell did that even mean? The smell of burning plastic wafted into the room, and Kyle leapt up from his perch on the toilet and raced to the kitchen. Smoke curled out around the edges of the oven door. He cranked the knob to off and threw open the door. Heat, steam, and black smoke billowed out at him. His shoes sat where he'd left them on the rack. The uppers, more faux than leather, had begun to melt, and the drips, hitting the bottom of the oven, had charred. As he took in the ugly corpses of his only pair of dress shoes, and wondered how he'd managed to set his rarely used oven to broil instead of warm, the smoke alarm began to wail. Late that afternoon, Kyle sat at the edge of the table, a chill breeze blowing from a ceiling vent straight down the opening in the back of his examination gown. Dr. Montana, adorned as always in a surgical cap and matching mask, perched on a stool, typing into her laptop. Her brown eyes, the only visible part of her face, occasionally skittered past his. Almost done, she said. His friend Zach had agreed to give him a ride to his appointment, but Kyle hadn't anticipated a jam-packed waiting room and a 2-hour wait, and he hoped he still had a ride back home. When he'd finally been called in, the nurse informed him he'd gained a few pounds since the last visit, and that his blood pressure was higher than normal. Now the doctor kept giving him sideways glances. She looked up at last. Mr. Franklin, your blood work reveals some problems. Do you have any family history of heart disease? Not that I'm aware of. He shuddered, not entirely from the overhead breeze. That might be in your favor. Your cholesterol's up past 250. I'm giving you a prescription. I'm also ordering more tests. Kyle shifted closer to the edge of the table. Beside the drugs, how do I bring that number down? Exercise more, eat less junk. You've got to make some changes. She stared straight at him. Nobody's coming to save you. Your life is yours to create. After the doctor left, Kyle sat on the table for another minute, thinking about the doctor's words. Most of them made sense, but that last line, what did that even mean? Zach grumbled when he got back to the car, but at least he had waited for him. Once they were underway, his friend said, "How'd it go?" "Not great," replied Kyle. "Guess I've got some heart issues. Need to go get a bunch of tests." Zach swerved to avoid a bicycle who'd chosen to ignore the bike lane. "Insurance gonna cover it?" "No idea. I'll have to ask." "Gets expensive fast." "I know, right? But I don't know if there's anything else I can do right now. I need to buy a vehicle so I can get back to work. Now it sounds like I might have some medical bills on top of everything. I got nothing in the bank. Think they'd let me borrow from my retirement account?" Zach did not speak, but focused on the busier-than-usual traffic. When they reached a clear patch of road, he muttered, "You know, your value doesn't decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth." "Excuse me?" asked Kyle. "Sorry, man, I'm running late." Zach pulled up to the curb. "Gonna have to drop you off here. It's just a few extra minutes walk." Sure, replied Kyle. No problem. He looked around when he hopped out, not knowing where he was. The directions offered by his phone revealed that a few extra minutes was nearly 20. 2 blocks in, a light rain began to fall, and he scoped the neighborhood for shelter. A nearby church seemed a good option. It had been years since Kyle had set foot inside one, but surely he could slip unnoticed into a pew, pretend to be reverent, and wait out the weather. "Can I help you?" asked a middle-aged woman adorned in jeans and a sweatshirt that proclaimed, "Be brave, be strong, be you." So much for not being noticed. I'm looking for a priest, I guess. He's probably not around right now. The woman smiled. "I'm Reverend Judith, the minister here at St. Paul's. Maybe something I can help you with?" "Oh," said Kyle. "I didn't recognize you without your, garb." "Vestments are for services," she said. "Most days I dress like everybody else. What's your name?" Sorry, I'm Kyle. Kyle Franklin." "What brings you to church today, Kyle Franklin?" He didn't know this woman. Maybe that made it easier to talk. "I'm feeling low today. Like the whole world's turned its back on me. How do I get past that?" "You're not alone, Kyle." She laid a hand on his shoulder. "When things get rough, I find that gratitude helps. What's good in your life right now?" "Not a goddamn thing." Kyle threw his hands in the air. "Sorry. Everything's just gone to shit lately. Sorry. Anyway, my wife served me with divorce papers a week ago. I'm barely clinging to a job I hate. My truck died this morning, and now my doctor's given me the uh-oh talk. I got nothing." "Gratitude turns what we have into enough," she said. "Are you even listening to me?" Kyle shook his head. "Never mind. Probably a mistake coming in here." "In your darkest hour, give thanks, for in due time the morning will come, and it will come with a ray of sunshine." "Yeah," Kyle rolled his eyes. "Whatever." Back on the sidewalk, he shook his fist at the sky, which continued to spritz him with cold rain. Church was supposed to be inspirational, supposed to bring a new sense of purpose. Instead, all he'd gotten was empty platitudes, no better than the motivational posters that corporate insisted be hung in every staff area at the hotel. The conversation had reminded him of something, though, and he pulled out his phone. He stepped back from the sidewalk, which had grown crowded, and leaned against the cool brickwork of the church, the eaves offering some respite from the weather. After a few minutes of fighting his way through first the auto attendant, then the reception desk at the office, he finally got connected to his lawyer. "Have you had a chance to read through those papers yet?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Franklin, I have." Kyle didn't like the sound of the man's tone. "What's going on?" "If you sign these papers as they stand, you're screwing yourself over. She'll never pay you a dime." "Damn it, she said she was going to play fair." "Everybody says that. I'm going to make some suggestions, but I have to warn you. If you heed my advice, it's going to slow the process down. A lot." "I need that alimony." Kyle shook his head, envisioning any settlement being swallowed by legal fees. "How do we proceed from here?" "Find your why, and your how will follow." "Excuse me, what?" "Find a way, not an excuse." What the hell did that mean? I'll call you back in a couple days. He hung up, stared at his phone for a long moment, then slipped it back into his pocket. "Everywhere I go, it's the same," Kyle said from the edge of the sidewalk to the crowd rushing past. "Nothing but mediocre mantras." Past the point of caring what anybody thought, he grew louder. "Everybody nowadays thinks they're a goddamn life coach." "You know, A woman in a smart emerald green coat and matching hat turned to look at him without slowing her pace. "The only constant in life is change. You need to embrace it." "You're stronger than you think," said a man in a bright yellow vest and an orange hard hat. A taxi drove past, the advertising placard atop the roof proclaiming, "The only failure is giving up." Pedestrian traffic was interrupted when the elderly woman wearing 4 oversized coats and pushing an overflowing shopping cart stopped in front of Kyle. She crossed her arms over her chest, glared at him, and said, "Growth begins at the end of your comfort zone." Having apparently completed her speech, she resumed pushing her cart forward. Open-mouthed, Kyle reached into his pocket to retrieve a tissue and instead came out with a tiny slip of paper. A fortune cookie fortune. With a dread nearly existential, he read the words printed on it. "Success is failure turned inside out." "That's it!" Kyle threw his arms skyward. "I'm just gonna end it all!" "Fall 7 times, stand up 8, said a voice from somewhere behind him. Kyle took off at a run, hoping he was heading in the right direction, not caring enough to stop and check. The following day, he awoke with a head full of asinine affirmations and empowering excerpts. He'd heard enough the previous day and had at last found a new sense of purpose. While his bank account strained toward the empty mark, he still had some wiggle room on his credit cards. He'd make the most of it. By mid-morning, he'd rented a vehicle, put down a deposit on a venue, and driven downtown to purchase everything he needed. He caught himself whistling on the way back to the van. He hadn't felt so positive in a long time. All that think positive stuff really was paying off. His first visit was with Marcus, his mechanic. After checking on the scrapping of his truck, he went on to talk about his ideas. Marcus seemed genuinely interested as he sipped the coffee Kyle had brought him. The rest of the day followed in a similar fashion. Some, like Marcus and Reverend Judith, had been more than happy to spend a few more minutes chatting with him, offering more self-help wisdom along the way. Others, including both his lawyer and doctor, had required additional creativity. It was late in the evening when Kyle, physically exhausted by the day's effort but filled with excitement, took the stage. Nearly 20 people packed the small meeting room, sitting up straight and facing him. They had little choice. Each of them had been zip-tied firmly to a hotel conference standard padded metal chair, and while a few had their eyes closed, nothing blocked their ears. The GHB Kyle had bought that morning had proven invaluable in getting them all there. Atop the small dais, he faced his audience. Yesterday, he began in his best impression of a motivational speaker, was a bad day. Today is a better day. Tomorrow? Who the hell knows? No one responded. Undaunted, he plugged forward with his presentation. Yesterday, each of you offered me something. A thick slice of motivational bullshit. A big empty platitude. Because everybody's a life coach now. As he spoke, he pointed at each of them in turn. With both arms held out, he said, "You know what? Life coaching's a big, steaming pile. This, though," he pointed to himself, "this is new. So you're all getting in on the ground floor of something different, powerful. Tonight, you all learn about my new role, the very opposite of a life coach." He paused, building to his dramatic announcement. "Before you stands a dream crusher, a demotivator." The audience remained quiet. Once again, they had little choice. In his original plan early that morning, Kyle had planned to procure ball gags for everyone, but between cost and a lack of available quantity, he'd settled for simple duct tape. Stepping down from the dais, he approached the first row of the audience. You've listened to energy drainers before, but not like me. He stopped and stood in front of Marcus, the mechanic. The man's eyes were wide open, staring. You think challenges are opportunities in disguise. Kyle pointed, his index finger inches from Marcus's forehead. Bullshit! Challenges are what drag us down. We'd be happier not having to deal with them every goddamn day. Kyle stopped in front of his boss, Jason. Who controls my life? Me? Hell no, it's you. Bosses, mechanics, doctors, lawyers, ministers. Every day I bend over to fill your schedules. I'd love to create my own life, but you fuckers never give me the chance. He stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. While I'm at it, my personal value decreases every time one of you douche nozzles cancels my appointment or blows me off for some higher profile client. He grabbed an empty chair, set it on the dais, and dropped into it, focusing on Reverend Judith in the second row. How about gratitude? I am grateful I get to wake up in the morning, but you know what? That doesn't put food in my fridge. If I go to bed with $1 in my pocket, and I'm grateful for it, it's still $1 in the morning. Not even enough for a cup of coffee. The one thing I heard from any of you shysters that was worth hearing was, find your why, and your how will follow. Why did all you people find the need to slap me with bullshit platitudes yesterday? Well, that question led directly to me figuring out how I was going to put a stop to it. He rose and walked the aisle, grinning at the people in the end seats as he progressed. I'm tired of change. I want to live my life in the most boring, ordinary way possible. Not think about anything. Not make any decisions. I don't want to embrace change. I want to kick it in the balls and tell it to piss off. How can I do that? He stopped at the last row, forward progress blocked by a shopping cart piled with black plastic bags, next to the old woman with too many coats. He hadn't found all the people from the sidewalk in front of the church. There were a few stand-ins, but she'd been easy. I'm not a strong person, he said, never asked to be. As for the growth beginning at the end of my comfort zone? He bent forward, his face inches from hers. She didn't even blink. Leave my goddamn comfort zone alone, he shouted. Kyle stood and returned to the front of the room. Yesterday, I fell down 7 times. Maybe it was 8. I don't give a shit. Not anymore. You know why? Because things aren't so bad down on the ground. Why should I get up? So one of you chuckle fucks can knock me right back down? In the front row, Marcus shifted slightly in his bonds. No one else moved. Most continued staring blankly at him. Instead of the merely docile audience he'd anticipated, they were pretty much catatonic. Had any of them heard a word of his rant? He'd spent hours the previous night working on it. Was it all a waste? And how the hell strong was that GHB he'd purchased? Marcus at least showed signs of being awake. Kyle stepped forward and gripped both of his mechanic's arms, then pulled back in a rush. The man's skin was cold and mottled with purple and blue patches. Kyle scanned the room and the blank, still staring eyes of the people there. Realization settled in. The likelihood of ever getting his old truck repaired, or his heart for that matter, had decreased significantly. Then he started laughing, because he'd done exactly what he'd set out to do. In addressing a room full of dead people, he was the absolute opposite. of a life coach. With a thunderous crash, the door burst open and a half-dozen uniformed cops dashed in. The first tackled Kyle and shoved him down, pressing his face to the floor. The others cursed and shouted, voices growing quieter as they apparently checked each member of the audience. "What have you done?" cried the cop on his back. Moments later, arms handcuffed behind, Kyle stared at the uniformed man who yanked him upright. "Put me away," he grinned. "Bring this story to an end." He hadn't intended to kill anyone, but in the end, things had worked out. He had a guaranteed ticket to prison. Prison meant routine. Prescribed times for eating and sleeping. No need for new dress shoes. No worries about car payments. And most of all, no more life coaching bullshit. "Believe me," said the officer, "this story's not over. Every ending's just a new beginning." Shake My Bones, composed and performed by Tim Parker. Sinister Minutes is presented by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. The musical score was composed and performed by Tim Parker. Our production team consists of Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. On behalf of everyone here at the Sinister Minutes podcast, namely Kurt Homan and Tim Parker, we thank you for listening, for joining us, as we explore all the ways in which we are not okay. This audio program is copyright 2024 by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.